thanks for the introduction, Marjorie, and for explaining how Creative Clyde exists to support creative endeavour in Glasgow. And as I say, I got the idea to put a panel discussion and group discussion together about the use of music, how music adds value to products and businesses. And so we'll introduce ourselves in a moment. One of our panellists is stuck in heavy traffic in a cab. He says he can see the science centre, he just can't get to it. So if we get bored waiting, maybe we'll just call him and get Jim to participate from a phone, but or Skype him in or something. But we'll get going, and he'll run in and join us in a moment. And we actually did have quite a few more people signed up to come than this, and I suspect the weather has put them off. But that's part of the reason why we're filming it, and this film will be available to watch immediately afterwards on the big screen outside. It won't, but maybe we can take clips of it if we're exciting enough. So my name's Dougal. I run a production company called Inner Ear, and as a collaborative consortium venture with Kenny and Amanda and Emma and Victoria and a couple of other people, we have put together this collective agency called ZULU, which Kenny can explain why it's called that. And it is a music licensing agency primarily for film, TV, games and advertising. But as part of that, we wanted to discuss in a broader sense how the use of music, actually from a creative point of view, but mainly from the people using music's point of view, how using music can add value to what you're doing. And here is Jim. We'll let you take your coat off, and we're just doing the intros, so you're in good time. And so we're going to talk through how, usually in this sort of context, we'll be talking about how use of music can help. Obviously, in terms of musicians and composers, there can be revenue streams through licensing your music for productions, but also for those of us using music in media, using it in events, as part of campaigns, in products and services, how that can actually help us make more money and grow business and develop relationships through the use of the right music in the right way. So with me I've got Kenny Inglis, Amanda Mitchell and Jim Wolff, and we're talking about different aspects of it. Kenny is a composer and licenses a lot of music for film and TV and digital productions. Amanda is a producer and music supervisor and was supervisor for the BBC primetime show Waterloo Road for its last couple of years of its run. And Jim is head digital at the Leith Agency, advertising agency, and works with music a lot for different campaigns. Is also a keen ukulele player, and we will be having a session afterwards. I forgot to bring my son's ukulele, but I have been practicing a little bit, and you can maybe show me a few chords later.
Just sing the ukulele instead.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, there's four of us, we'll pick a string each. So, Kenny, could you kick things off by, I should add that I have various things that I would like to cover, but I'm very much open for this being discursive, especially as we have quite an intimate group here, so feel free to jump in if something occurs to you and you have a pressing question, and we'll certainly open up for questions in the latter part of the conversation, but don't feel shy to interrupt at any point. Kenny, why is music valuable? What about creating music for you helps to add value to that, be it in your case often a soundtrack?
I think it's a kind of two-part thing, the value of music. I think across the board, if you think about all the ways that music gets used, so it could be in a TV drama, a film, it could be a trailer, something as awful as a corporate video. Music is used in all these different ways, and
we'll come back to that. point, because I think that was interesting you described, because it doesn't need to be awful, and actually often music
that's
is
true.
the reason that you might
Yes,
describe it
that,
as
well, that's
such.
what I was
So
going
yeah,
at, yeah.
we'll come back to that.
No, I think starting back to front, it's quite often the last thing that's thought about, music, in terms of productions up to a certain level. I mean, if you take your average Hollywood film, obviously the music's massively important and always done pretty well, with the exception of a few films. But as you come down the sort of scale and the production budgets, and you get down to the kind of general use of music, it's always kind of, I think, the last thing on the list, which is unfortunate, because if you think about a product, someone trying to sell a product, so an advert, you know, what you don't want to do is walk away from an advert or some kind of product-based thing on the web, and your lasting thought is the music in that was terrible, you know. It's a bit like, I've got endless analogies about, you know, if a company produced the world's fastest sports car, and then it was all, you know, all this fantastic technology and whatever, but then they painted it with, you know, an old can of emulsion out of the garage. That's kind of sometimes where music seems to sit in the sort of the pecking order of what's seen as valuable in a production. But I think it's more a kind of, for me, it's always been a misunderstanding. It's production companies don't really fully get how important the music can be. You know, when you go back to the kind of Hollywood film thing, it's so specific. It's got to be so right in terms of mood and tone, or lyrically it has to be in context. Yet when you come down, it's almost like a kind of afterthought. You know, it's this thing that it needs a bit of music, but no one really thinks about how important that bit of music is. So for me, when it comes to any kind of, you know, briefs or jobs I've had to do, you get a feel for how specific, you know, the music has to be and how important it is to that particular company. The smaller companies and the smaller the job, generally the less specific it has to be and the less well thought out, you know, the approach to what music they want. The further up the scale, the further up the budgets, the more important it gets, you know. But I think there's a general kind of lack of emphasis put on how valuable music is, you know.
Amanda, did you find that when you were music was very important to Waterloo Road, and was it an important part of the value of the production, you think?
Well, I would agree with Kenny to a large extent there. I mean, obviously my experiences with working particularly with commercially released music rather than composition or score or something like that, where I'm given a direct brief, but often in that situation, on that kind of drama where you're working at a BBC level, music was brought up in post-production, which would be by the time you're editing it, and that gives you maybe 3 weeks to compromise with 8 people on what should go in an episode, and they wanted maybe up to 15-20 tracks per episode. And I think actually when you look at shows where the music works really well, a lot of the time it's been thought of at pre-production or production stage, and a lot of the time in Waterloo Road when stuff really worked was when I got scripts or I could get into the episode before I seen it, you know, before you actually see what it looks like. And you can start thinking about it early on, because when you kind of marry them a bit earlier on like that, it does come together a bit better. You can tailor the cut more to the track. But if you think about all that last minute, there's not as much time to recut the scene or the episode to the music that's there. So more time is needed really. And I think in some instances, even though they know that music's a good, it'll work, they maybe just don't put enough time into making it actually all settle into place, if you know what I mean. Maybe just not quite, kind of what you were saying, that kind of misunderstanding of quite how important it is, or when it's important to get that right, you know. Again, Waterloo Road's a really unique example because it was up to maybe 20 tracks an episode, but small sections over an hour for a generally quite young audience, and that's again rare in TV. So again, maybe it's a lack of understanding from a production point of view there, that maybe people just don't quite understand yet how important it is.
At what stage, Jim, in the campaigns that you work on, does music come up? Is it in the early stages?
Probably not as early as it should be. I mean, it's
Right.
interesting. Like the best ads and the most memorable adverts, you'll know yourself, are the ones where the music and the script and the content work really well together. I mean, the John Lewis ads are a great example recently, where the Half the World Away works brilliantly with the story of the man on the moon, whether you like Oasis or not. But so we do try to think of the music as soon as possible when writing a script, but it does usually start with the script first and then the music. You do get occasionally some ad ideas which are just a kind of a play on words on a bit of a song, but then they tend to kind of not have much longevity. You can't really do a series on them, so we tend to kind of write a script and then try and think of some music that will go with that. And often it can come down to luck and a lot of trolling to find something that works well. But I mean, just from our archives, I'll just keep going. We did the Tennant's Caledonia ad many years ago. And
this is an example that we keep coming back to, though, because it was a wonderful marriage of the story and the song.
Yeah, but it was completely by luck. It was.
Does everyone know that advert, the Dougie MacLean Caledonia ad?
Yeah.
It's often celebrated as a great example of music in advertising.
Yeah, well, I think it had got right down to the edit stage. So there was no the whole piece of film had been made, and they were like, right, okay, we better find some music for it. And it was just a kind of random encounter where one of the creatives, and I think the producer at the time, were just round at some studio, and they were like, oh, you should listen to this. When they played the original Dougie MacLean song, which was quite folky, against the piece of film, it just married up perfectly, right to it didn't even really need an edit. And right to the points where like certain words matched up, so that was just pure luck that worked. But it's a good example. And actually, I think it did very well for the song as well, because the rocky recording of it that was used in it went to number one, I think, in the Scottish charts back when we had our own charts. So it did well.
What about, do you think, the perception of value from, you've all touched on it, but from the audience, be that a viewing audience, a consumer audience, a listening audience, a playing audience, whatever they are, how much do you think they, so you've recently composed music, Kenny, for some TV productions in the UK. There was the Super Hospital documentary series that BBC did. And there's a lot of music in that, and it's an important part of it. But how much do you think the audience pay attention, or how much does it affect their?
I think
perception?
it's.
This is one for you and Amanda.
I think more so than the people making the actual documentary think.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the point I was getting at before. Where the misunderstanding happens is kind of the actual programme makers, to an extent, don't seem to get. Maybe it's. I mean, that the Super Hospital was a BBC internal production. The BBC thing I did before, which was an independent production, I felt the kind of marriage of the music and the actual programme and the content and what it was about was far more kind of in sync, purely because it was less, filling out forms and staring at budgets, like the BBC tend to do. The first BBC documentary that I'm talking about there had a lot of archive footage in it, and for me as a composer, I found it very easy to get into that kind of mood and tone, because I felt like this was what was really important about the actual programme. Likewise, the folk that were making the programme felt the music was incredibly important to sort of reflect this sort of old archive footage and the kind of slight romance of it, The more recent one, it just felt like there was a bit of a disconnect, as if the whole kind of red tape aspect and the sort of internal affairs in a big TV production company tend to get in the way of making it really fluid. And I think that does come down to the audience. I think the audience will pick up on it. I mean, personally, I've had more comments on the independent production with the archive footage than I've had on the Super Hospital one, even though the Super Hospital programme probably had twice as much music in it. Because in that I was kind of fighting slightly against the kind of bureaucracy aspect of it, as opposed to just going with the kind of two-way feeling of working with the production company. So I think it is picked up more. Like the corporate thing that I've mentioned, you know, I think people do potentially walk away from seeing something and just think, you know, they maybe forget what the message was in the programme or what the product was because the music was so bad that their lasting memory is this kind of terrible music. So I think it can go quite wrong, you know, if the connection's not there. Or at least generally that's the way it seems to be.
Excuse me, just wondering, Kenny, how much freedom would you say that you had on the BBC production as compared to the independent one?
Well, the independent one was a BBC. I mean, it was BBC, but it was an independent production company. But yes, very little on the one that was BBC in-house, because I was saying earlier on, it was the kind of thing where you'd write a piece of music. They would give you a kind of a few clips as to what was going on, you know, very rough. Say an emergency helicopter coming in with a patient and landing on the roof of the hospital. So you write a piece of music, sketch out, send it away. 10 people in the BBC office would go, "This is great, this is ideal, this is whatever." Then an exec would come up from London and say, "No, I don't like it," you know, and you'd have to start again. Whereas the independent production companies, you're kind of working with them all the time, and you send them little bits, and they're coming back and forward. So the more red tape, the more paperwork that's involved, you know, the more people that are in the kind of chopping block, the less freedom you get, and the less kind of a connection there is. You know, it feels more clunky as a composer.
I know that's this disconnect is quite interesting. No, it's not always a disconnect, but you know, just that the sort of the different sides of the fence between the audience and the producers. You know, there were a lot of people involved in the decision-making chain or
At the end
tree.
of the day, music's a really personal thing for everybody. So you're not going to, nobody gets it right every time. I hear about people talking about the guy that done Grand Budapest Hotel and how great a music supervisor he is. But actually, there's lots of instances where he's got it wrong across lots of films that he's done. And I think I probably got it wrong sometimes on Waterloo Road, just as much as the production team did or whatever. But what I was going to pick up on what you said there, Kenny, is it's very much that kind of, between the audience and the production, everybody knows that the music's important, but it's kind of what you're saying, it's like your imagination is narrowed when you have more and more information about how it actually works. So the more you know about copyright licensing, the less you want to deal with it. And I think that becomes a big thing for production companies, whereas an audience has no idea the parameters that they're dealing with, especially in this day and age where people will just slap a track on a YouTube video, upload it, never feel a repercussion from it, and not actually understand what licensing issues are wrong with that, you know, and think that it's actually a lot easier than it is. And, you know, they'll see something, well, why didn't they put that on it? Well, actually, the reality is that you probably couldn't because of X, Y, Z, and then that person. So it's like that narrowing of the imagination. When I went into Waterloo Road, the music that I was presenting and the approach that I had is so different from how I came out of it, because I went in thinking, let's get that track on there, that would work brilliantly, la 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 la, and then my imagination was narrowed down by everybody else's opinion, age gaps, you know, different demographics, you know, just loads of different stuff. And that, I think, really does, that's where the disconnect happens, where everyone knows it's really important, but it is this kind of trade-off of like, nobody really wants to deal with it, and it does get sticky. Some people get their hands dirty though, and you know, I think shows like Mad Men, for example, they've got their hands really dirty with sync licensing, but it's came out for the better for the show. It's a fantastic show for that.
What you mean by get their hands dirty is that they will get immersed in the often complicated business of licensing that piece of music for that show. Yeah. But you think it pays off? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, Mad Men for me is a standout show, but a lot of the music stays with me. I can remember scenes very well because of the music, and from reading about the process behind it, it was very well clearly thought out. almost to the point of it being like almost like on the nose music videos, but thinking about it in pre-production already, what nuances touch upon the aesthetic of this scene, and actually really building it into that. And I think Mad Men's probably one of the greatest examples of commercial music use on TV drama, period, you know.
In terms of that, Jim, the complexity of licensing can be a complicated and costly business, but for the kinds of productions, especially for digital productions, do you sometimes take I'm not sure if it necessarily be described as such, but the easy route and go to a kind of catch-all licensing or library music resource, or do you always try to prefer, if you can, even if it's for a relatively modest fee, to commission something or to license an existing track?
Yeah, I think we'd always prefer to license an existing track or commission something new. I think but for depending on the budget, depending on the complexity, I'd love to say we're like Mad Men, but we are a little. But it's sometimes easier to go to an audio network, and you can get full rights of it, and it makes it much easier.
Although I was looking at their rates card, so Audio Network, to anyone who doesn't know, is a library music resource for media production, and they've got rates that like editors and filmmakers can buy a personal license that they could use just for themselves, or they can use it to try something out for 79 pence. And then if the client wants it, then they can pay for the rights to the track. And so if it were used in a corporate video, for example, then, and we will come on to this, then it would cost 120 quid. And in an advert, I'm not sure if that would cover TV, but certainly in promotional use for advertising, it's £495. So that might be the kind of fee you're looking at to license something from Audio Network. But it does strike me, whilst that is not a princely sum for a musician, depending on the brand, it's still, if you went to an independent musician and offered them 500 quid for an original track, they would probably be, depending on what everything that's involved, or not even to write something, just to license something, provided they owned all their own rights and it doesn't become a minefield of clearance, then that would seem, more attractive sometimes.
And that is, sometimes we've gone straight to musicians, and it's a funny one, because it often it is down to luck, or it's down to relationships, or it's down to knowing a certain type of person, or seeing someone that weekend, or hearing something on a blog that you think, actually that could fit with
that's
that.
going to fit.
And it will depend on who the creative teams are, who the producers are on it, and who they know, and it does vary. And actually, it's the cost thing is an interesting one, because we've had work or from Calvin Harris to Django to various other kind of big Scottish artists, and Calvin Harris was really easy to work with in terms of his people, not so much directly with him, we recently had a sort of a piece which for just a small bit of music. It was one of the Iron Brew ads where the guy's listening to some music, and we thought, it'd be great to have like some Scottish band playing in his earphones. And then we went to they're kind of reasonably sized, I would say. They're sort of up and coming, not big, not small, and they were asking a kind of a huge amount for it, and just with the budgets being we were like, well, we can't stretch to that. And it's a shame, really, because it would have been a bit of exposure on an Iron Brew ad, and it's not. But what I'm trying to get at is that the sort of the costs sometimes don't necessarily correspond to the size of the artist, and sometimes some of the bigger artists are actually better at acknowledging that the kind of the size of what we're actually doing, and just saying, okay, we'll have it for $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever it is, compared with I think some of the smaller, less experienced negotiators who will say, no, we want everything.
Who play really hard to get.
Yeah. I'm not. I feels a bit like I'm from this like big corporate machine that wants like sort of grind down the little.
No, because
people, but actually there's a sort of a negotiation art,
Yeah.
and sometimes it makes sense just to accept that something is going to be part publicity for a piece of music.
I mean, as a producer, I'm caught in the middle of that often with trying to balance what's available in the budget, you know, and it would be the same in terms of licensing something versus getting the best track, the track that's going to add the most value to the production, you know, and resonate with the audience enough. It's going to keep bobbing around, so let's tackle this corporate video issue.
Get out of the way.
So this is something I was thinking about recently because there's my company does a lot of live streaming of events and a lot of capture of big events of all different kinds, and we were documenting a tourism conference the other week that you spoke on one of the panels at Jim. The music that played just as people filed in and out of the event was, I think, just what the sound man had on the CD, and this is interesting to me because sometimes that can be a bit of an afterthought, and I appreciate that in the running of an event there are, well, I know, you know, there are many things to take into account, but sometimes that kind of holistic view that you take of I suppose the whole experience can filter through to incidental music.
What was playing at the beginning of this one?
Well,
I missed it. Sorry.
I was actually trying to play some of the music from the Zulu roster, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to come through the amp. So I should have asked someone at the sound centre, which is slightly embarrassing for a digital media producer who works extensively with sound. But did. We've probably got like 6 sound engineers in the room as well. But it's what is it that you find so abhorrent about music and corporate video?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of examples. I remember getting a job doing music for Babcock. I don't know what it was they were selling, but it was a very big thing, a big metal thing that presumably cost millions. I mean, it was some very, very well engineered piece of technology that they were trying to sell, and it was a 2-minute corporate video that they were pushing out to, I assume, prospective clients. And by the time it came to me, the budget was something like, 50 quid for a piece of original. So they wanted a piece of music that sounded like Moby. That was it. They wanted a Moby sound-alike, which comes up fairly often actually. But the thing I couldn't understand, and I've never understood about corporate video, is if this is their shop window, if this is their thing that they're going out and saying, here's our product that we've developed, it's cost us millions to conceive, and look at all this glamorous sort of filming that we've done and lighting and everything to show off at its best. How can it possibly be that when it comes to sticking music on the entire 2-minute film, they've only got 50 quid and that's all that matters to them? Because like Jim was saying about the audio network, and you were saying about the sort of £495, it's not really that much more to come to any number of composers, of which there are thousands, and say we're looking for something that reflects this product, or reflects us as a brand, or us as a company. Can you give us a few ideas? Pay a bit more than what they're offering, and get something that's completely unique, that is kind of designed to be included with the visual, and it just seems sort of,
or I suppose for the same money or less, license an existing track that fits.
Exactly, license a track, even for an original track isn't going to cost massively more. It seems so sort of kind of almost irresponsible in terms of a company of that size. It's different when it's
Well,
a,
it's the same as your sports car bad paint job analogy.
Yeah, I mean it's it's like having a prize-winning racehorse and feeding at McDonald's. It's that kind of
We were
level of
discussing this stuff
stupidity.
yesterday, and Kenny kept coming out with more and
I've
more
got loads of
analogies.
Yeah.
So they might come up.
Just wondering what the problem is, and presumably a big company like Babcock's works with an agency. So is
Well, that's true.
Babcock's
Yeah.
not listening to the agency? Don't mean to pick on Babcock,
Mm.
but do they not listen to the agency? Do they all forget to talk about music? Does the agency forget to raise it at the first meeting?
It's probably the agency's fault. I would
Yeah.
think.
Surely you hire a company to do the corporate video, who would then break that down to say, well, we're going to get soundtracks done, so when you come to yourself, and they would know what a budget would be for a good.
Well,
The Babcock are huge and make big compressors, because I've worked in that
Right.
industry, and they should be spending the money, as you say. That is your front shop window.
aye.
And you put that out, and they would take that corporate video to seminars, conferences,
Yeah.
and it would be on
Well,
the
you would
website.
think that they would include the soundtrack in it, but
Yeah.
that's where it goes wrong.
Yeah.
They don't actually. It's like I said earlier on about it being an afterthought. For some strange reason, and it's very broad. It's not just the odd company that do that. The use of music or the importance of the music is never really a consideration. I think they almost think, oh, we'll get something for free or next to nothing, and we'll stick it on at the end. That's how kind of stupid the
But
thinking
I
is.
think what probably the problem there is that they're overlooking what we're talking about here, the value that can be created by using the right music in the right way
Yeah.
with that promotional video.
Sorry, there's something that Amanda said earlier on. It's just I think it kind of it's part of the whole thing is that it's really more of a cultural shift away from the value of music, because so much is just put on YouTube and people add other people's music, copyrighted music, and then they do this wonderful thing, no copyright intended. What?
Yeah.
And they haven't licensed music officially, so therefore it just contributes to this whole devaluing of copyright, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then it doesn't help that the United States is trying to erode copyright law even more, so that songwriters get even less money through streaming and blah 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 blah. But what does the panel think about that generally? It's really more of a cultural shift away from seeing any value in music.
This is it's just become more and more. Well, the erosion has got ever greater, I think, into the perception and value of copyrighted works in general. It was quite a few years ago now. We curated a music business event with Scottish Enterprise and some other bodies all about the sort of innovation and particularly in digital and music. And I was intrigued that a music lawyer friend of mine, or copyright lawyer friend of mine, whispered to me during one presentation from an agency guy who worked a lot with music and was talking about the importance of licensing music. And the lawyer said, I bet none of the photos in his presentation have been licensed, and it didn't look like it. It did kind of look that. It could be doing the guy a disservice, which is why I'm not mentioning it.
Perception in the digital world that just because you can access it,
Yeah, so easily.
doesn't mean that you should.
It's a bit harder to rip off music and video, not much harder. It'll take you 30 seconds as opposed to a few seconds, but you can get images in a few seconds, you can get copy in a few seconds, and the access and the immediacy of these copyrighted works that people plunder and plagiarise does, I think, make it, and the fact that, because of course what you're doing there is stealing, but it doesn't feel like stealing, and then you could be passing it off as your own, and you could be generating value or even earning money off the back of other people's copyrighted works. But this is getting, I'm not sure exactly what, the big companies have been trying to fight it for many years unsuccessfully. In some ways you've got to roll with it and figure out how to monetize in other
I think
ways.
The thing is, as well, something that Jim said there, using the word exposure, which tends to get used frighteningly common.
I think it was 10 years ago the head of EMI said that this year he wanted, at the beginning of the year, he wanted to see an end to the term promotional value. So, question.
Yes, I see what you're saying is, which is so valuable, you're talking about an ethos. Greg, you and Amanda are talking about a reality. And the musician union says you just need to do a lot of live gigs. You need to create real music because that's the only reality there is. But of course, you're talking about making a business out of putting digital music to a product and creating something better. And you're talking about giving people the opportunity to do things. I think it's great. I think ZULU is the best chance we have in Glasgow, at least, of someone's got one. But you need scrupulous people to come to you and say, I want to do the right thing by everyone. You see what a difficult situation you kind of have. It's like being in a very short, stormy sea.
I think
And
it's.
the only stability is companies that say, we're going, aiming for something better.
I think it's really one of the points I was going to say after Greg spoke there was, you know, although the whole copyright landscape and all the kind of availability of music and all that has changed rapidly, there has been a massive, you know, erosion and all of that. I still think that the main problem is the lack of understanding. I mean, I could go back 20 years ago, and I can't honestly say in 2 decades that companies, whether they're, you know, small TV production companies or ad agencies, not all of them obviously, Jim, and corporate clients have any greater understanding of how important music is in terms of adding value to their product or their production. I don't think it's changed at all. I think it's, you know, it's one of the reasons why we started up ZULU, is because I feel a lot of people just approach small music agencies or music libraries because they don't really understand what they can get or what the opportunities are to do something that's a bit different, that does increase, you know, the kind of end product. And that, you know, it runs in line with the kind of the copyright thing and the availability of music and how vast, you know, what a vast amount of music there is online that you can get if you want. But it's to me, it's always been an awareness issue, and that's really what it boils down to, you know.
I think that's, I mean, it's kind of what you were asking there. I think the fault or the problem lies in the filmmakers, ultimately the producers, because and I think we
bat it from the agency back to the production company.
Well, no, I think, I mean, I take ourselves as also guilty of it as well sometimes, because often, I mean, we'd never sully ourselves with a corporate video, but we might do a brand film, and we you know, we'll spend ages looking at the design and the visuals and the script and all of that, and we won't necessarily think of the music until later on. And actually, I mean, after this, I'm going to go back and I'm going to say, no, we should think of it much earlier. But I think that's, and I think we're all guilty of it, because we think of film as being visual primarily, and when we think about the time and resources we allocate to it, it's probably about 90 to 95% on the visuals. But what we all agree and we know is that the sound actually accounts for more. And there was an interesting study, a psychological study even, around people's appreciation of film. And if you could get rid of about 90% of the film and still keep the soundtrack, and people still understand it and still get value of it. But if you were to do it the other way around and get rid of 90% of the sound and keep the visuals, is that people wouldn't get anywhere near as much benefit from it. So it's actually, we all are guilty of having it the wrong way around.
A film director I know said that he thought that soundtrack was 80% of a film. So really, he just made that statistic up on the spot, but he did think it was tremendously important, and I thought that was interesting. He's a very visual director, but I mean, it adds a tremendous amount, doesn't it? It's interesting watching TV shows. Both of you will know a lot about this, before the final mix is done, and certainly before music is added, and it feels quite bare.
Well, I mean, there was lots of times during Waterloo Road where I would be very upset about what was going on or what was not going on.
But in the drama, or
of course in the drama. Those poor school kids. No,
Angus Deaton's Love Life.
Yes, it's so gripping. But it's that thing of, you know, sometimes I would watch the producer come in and watch the kind of stuff that she had to deal with as a producer in the production and think, no wonder she's not giving me more than half an hour, and I can see why she's banging her head off the wall, and she's already done 3 and yeah, I don't know, like, there isn't enough room for people to breathe to think about it, and yeah, it does become this emphasis on the visual, like you say, but a lot of the time, even myself on smaller, more corporate production or audio pieces, I will just use what I can find because it's an easier day. And it does become that. It becomes a really stressful environment, especially when maybe 8 or 10 of you are arguing over one song that somebody just wants to go home at the end of the day. Like, it's just a TV show, you know.
But I suppose how we get around that, and how the point Marjorie made about, you know, how we address this problem is if everybody kind of dials it back to think about when you're starting out to create something, what is it we want the audience, be that, you know, viewers or consumers or whatever, to get out of it or to take away from it, and what is music, what part does music play in that? And it might be more or less important than we might first think, but, you know, I had to try and reason that out and evaluate it with people, and then work from that position so that it doesn't become that at the last minute, oh, we need some music.
I don't know if it's also, it becomes an intimidating thing, because music arguably has a lot more kind of, it's seen as more of a commodity maybe than other things. Like, there's a lot more money and IP and emotion and all sorts of weird things. Like, to me it's like a big black hole, and
intangible assets of music. Yeah.
And I don't know if that becomes an intimidating thing as well, where people just think like, and vice versa. I know artists that are you know, are reluctant to get involved because, you know, they might think that a label or a publisher or a BBC or network or somebody's going to destroy their creativity or whatever. Can't really remember where I was going with this, but
I think
the
word that
you finish off.
Well, I think it was interesting that you hit upon emotion, because I think, and that is, emotion is, of course, intangible and difficult to quantify in terms of value, but has an incredibly strong resonance with people. And Jim, you'd probably be looking for that emotional quantity when you're thinking about use of music.
Yeah, I mean, there's adverts for different things. Sometimes it's very product led, sometimes it's very brand led. And if you're wanting to do something more brand focused, then the motion is a big driver of that, and the music plays a big part. And for those types of ads, then the music becomes integral to it, and there'll be a lot of time spent, a lot of researching, and then there's this kind of going into the black hole of licensing and finding out who owns what, and making deals. There's negotiations, and I suppose that's, to your point, is that's why I suppose sometimes music isn't as well developed, as that there's a whole side of it that is essentially out of our control. So it kind of ends up being something you kind of like, oh god.
Sorry, cut in, but it's just, there was a kind of element of that a lot of the time with editors and directors when you'd be picking music, where they just didn't understand what you were trying to explain to them about the copyright status. And on the spreadsheet that you'd log all these tracks on and all their usage, there was a colour-coded system at the bottom that you could use to colour the tracks in according to the status, and it was all really ominous, not really making really vague statements like could possibly be cleared but not really sure, or like definitely be cleared but it's not cleared yet, you know, all these weird status places where because there's so many different rights and that, and when you start talking, people just, it's either clearable or it's not to them, and they don't get like, well actually, you know, that label's easier for us to clear than that label, and why? And then to them they're just like, is it clearable or not? And it kind of tied back into what we're talking about earlier on, where it's just like, you know, if they're going to use the audio network track or the band, it's like, well, we're still waiting on the band to let us know if we can get that.
And I suppose that comes back to your point of the difference between the ethos and the practicality. You know,
Yeah, I'd just like to make a point as a sound engineer in the earlier days for TV and radio. Sound quality has improved. The method of portraying that sound has improved. You just need to look at the TVs and the sound systems that you get with TVs, or even the corporate presentation equipment, that is so important that you get that right, because if you could use this on a selling benefit when you're selling to companies about the importance of sound and music in your videos, the way you're actually presenting that music has increased and improved tremendously over the years. So they're really, you just need to look at a domestic TV and look at the sound systems you can put alongside that, and that's for music, that's for audio. Okay, so it's important you get that point across that music is a big part to complement video now, much more than it did 30 years ago. Audio was on the sideline and video was big, but now I think sound is got a big part to play in it.
Yeah, because the sound reproduction is of much higher quality.
Absolutely.
And much more importance in the devices you're saying as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've had corporate presentations where delegates have walked into the room and you've had good music playing. It really brings the levels of enthusiasm up.
Are you rubbing it in again?
Of course, there is
Use a rock box.
there is the inverse to that, of course, as well, which is, you know, that there's so many people now listening to music on, you know, sites like SoundCloud, where the actual data compression is so heavy-handed that the sound quality is kind of sort of down, you know, and there's a lot of people listening to music on little tiny earbuds that come free with their iPhones, and you know, viral you know, videos that are ad videos that go on you know, embedded on websites that pop up and play through little laptop speakers. So there's that whole kind of, you know, it's a kind of mass consumption of music, but in these kind of sort of almost kind of lo-fi ways as well. So it goes kind of in both directions, you know.
That kind of, I suppose, what you mentioned here, and the variety of different ways of listening to it, also, it's all part of the experience and the environment. And it occurs to me, you know, talked a wee bit about in terms of an event, and the music can be part of the framing of that and the brand experience, and that the same is true in establishments and public places. And I remember being in one hotel that I thought everything about the hotel was wonderful, apart from the music, which was awful.
Yeah.
And
I'm just thinking of Inverness in that hotel, actually.
Oh yeah,
The music,
yeah,
the
that was
covers,
pretty
it's
dreadful.
all like really slow tempo covers of just anything and everything.
yeah, but it was
I love
only covers they
Yeah.
played. This was the Expo North
That was a nice
Creative
license.
Industries convention earlier this year, and yeah, I mean that, like, something is, and there's often, I'm struck by this in a hotel that has, and a hotel is an interesting example of it, because it is an immersive experience. You sleep there, you eat there, you spend a bit of time in this place, and you know, anything other than an absolute rock bottom budget hotel, they think a lot about the visual aesthetic, about what it looks like,
Yeah.
what it feels like, in terms of, you know, the beds and things you come into, the quality of the towels and all that, and what it tastes like, what it smells like, but what it sounds like might not. You know, some places actually get that spot on, and we've got, you know, a friend of ours who will, I'm sure, collaborate with ZULU, runs a music design agency called Open Ear, which is all about background music for spaces and getting that sound just right, matched to the
Yeah.
place. But it's quite amazing when that becomes an afterthought, because it can
Yeah.
really put you off.
There's
can't it?
also quite a good example that I thought of the other day. Was I had to phone up Glasgow City Council to get a, you know, like a printout of how much council tax I'd paid, and they had this awful loop on the you know you're always on the phone to them for like half an hour before you get through, and they had this awful loop which started off, and it was dreadful to begin with, but then at some point it halved and left, so it was kind of twice as bad, you know. And I was just thinking, it's the same thing that you get sometimes with banks, where you think, if there's a surefire way to really annoy a customer, it's to have some really poor, irritating music on when you're on hold. You know, it's such a simple thing to find something that's decent, or get someone to compose something.
That's just where I suppose that comes back to that whole notion of the music not being thought about
No.
enough in advance, or it's just not joined up enough.
No.
Because that's where they might, you know, a bank might they might have licensed the track that they've got on their TV ad, and they use some of it as hold music, or a version of it as hold music, but the quality might be really bad, or it might just be a section of it that gets really irritating when looped, or you might be on hold for quite a long time, and so you hear this same track going over and over and over, and if it's a heavy repeat advert on TV, it becomes counterproductive in terms of ingratiating
And
the brand.
it doesn't take that much thought and effort to put together a playlist for when you're on hold. You know, somebody could do it. It wouldn't cost them much money to sort it out, and it would completely change how people react to being stuck on the phone for 15 minutes. But again, it's the same thing. It's just you know, it's the last on the list. It's a complete afterthought, and it's painful as to how they don't put any value to it. You know.
Are there any more questions at this point?
A lot of companies are now doing advertising their products and their services, but as opposed to music and hold, which I think is a good thing to do. Opposed to hearing the music, but it's for your own business. You want to tell people about your latest release or your latest service or product. That's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it can engage you more. I think there's an opportunity. If you've got a captive audience, you're as well to inform them as much as possible. We talked a wee bit about, we talked a bit about the experience, but we were talking about this yesterday in respect to computer games and Grand Theft Auto, and how that was, we were talking about examples of games that sort of made that shift, I guess, and this comes with the development of the hardware and the software that enables sound to sound, you know, the sound became a lot better quality, that music, commercially released tracks could be licensed as part of the soundtrack for the game, and GTA did that very prominently to create a whole world. And you know,
Well, I mean, even before they started doing the licensing of the commercial music, their first couple of games, it was like all composed or like sourced in and stuff like that, but it was done in a similar way. They had like 8 stations or whatever, and you can go on YouTube now and watch these videos of like GTA 2 soundtrack, this radio station, and it's just made up tracks and stuff like that, or little clips from things. But even that was really interesting because it was like personalising this aspect of the game that you could then choose yourself, you know. And then obviously now you've got, you know, the new GTA games, and it's like that authenticity is ramped right up by, you know, having stations where it could be a real radio station, you know, and it really fits into a tone and aesthetic, and then you're driving about listening to that music like you would normally in your own life. That's the music that you listen to, whatever, and it brings this kind of sense of authenticity. Plus there's obviously tracks that are made for the games, so then that kind of reels you in more. But I mean, when I was younger, I remember my brother showing me how to hack into the system files for The Sims so that you could change the music in their CD players to your own music, because it was just MP3 files. And that, like, GTA now is like a kind of like massive example done by the game, understanding how people play, what else they're doing when they're playing, and knowing their audience and their demographic enough to go, well, that's the kind of stuff they're into, so let's pick up on these nuances and this aesthetic and bring it around, because that's who we want to buy this game. So what else do they do, you know? And obviously that applies to lots of different
and
things.
I think Rockstar took a very uncompromising approach to licensing the music, and they would really try to get that James Brown track or you know, whatever.
Well, I mean, the stuff they've got on it, it's all really big stuff, so yeah, there would have been a lot of money spent there for sure.
It's all about it's about production values. You know, I think a comparison as well is, you know, in the US, there's a kind of trend for, if you listen to a trailer, they tend to use somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 tracks across the, you know, quite often across 2.5 minutes. You'll hear 10 seconds of a track, 5 seconds of a track, you know, and the budgets are so ridiculous. They spend, you know, someone once told me they spend over $1 million on the music for the trailer, and they spend a tenth of that on the music for the film. So they're putting out these, clips that are maybe 50 grand, whatever, and it's purely because what they're doing is they're selling the product. If the product's the film, the trailer's the advert for the film, and they're pushing all this money into getting the right music for it, to have the massive impact. And then if you go back to the corporate video thing again, here's Babcock, who are a multi-million pound company, huge company, selling vastly expensive products, but the emphasis they place on the same thing is right down at the far end, and that's that's just the difference between these kind of two aspects of how music's used,
So, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, as a business coach, I look at everyone in the room here, and I think you've all got businesses, you're part of businesses, your own businesses. It's all about survival in the world. It's all about making money. It's all about growth and development. And I sit here and I think, how are they all going to do that? Some of the businesses here may have good lucrative contracts with organisations. Some may be wishing to get more involved with organisations, and they come here to network to do that. It's all about how to make money and survive and make profit, because all of the businesses are profitable enterprises, and to use the talents and experience that you've all got to make money and growth. And it's interesting to see how you do that. I think ZULU, the name ZULU is great. I don't know who thought that up.
Can you?
I'd be really keen to find out, because that's a great name. And
I can
I
try.
wonder if your soundtrack for that would be drums,
Oh no. I can try and explain it. The vague story. It was basically it comes from the ZULU principle, which I know they use it as an expression in stocks and shares dealing. But the ZULU principle was a book written about a lady in America who basically went off and studied the Zulu warriors, and in 2 years, from knowing nothing about Zulu warriors, in the space of 2 years she became the world's leading expert on Zulu warriors, because the subject was so niche. So it's based on the principle that if you do one thing particularly well, you can be the best at it. Zulu is basically, to make the comparison, a normal music agency is generally, I was talking about this earlier on, 3 or 4 guys in a room, and someone approaches them on a Monday and says, we need a rock track for this corporate video, and the 4 guys sit down and write a rock track as if they're a rock band, and then on the Tuesday some other company comes in and says, oh, we need a blues track. So these 4 rock musicians take their leather jackets off and become blues musicians on the Tuesday. And the whole point is they'll do various types of music for various different productions, but the authenticity, there's no authenticity in it at all. It's just someone, jack all trades kind of thing. ZULU to us was, we wanted to create a company where we have a roster of people who do one thing very well. So we've got, for instance, a jazz composer. So if we get a job in looking for a bespoke piece of jazz music, we can give it to the right person who's spent 20 years of their life writing jazz music. If we need a rock track, we've got a rock band. The idea is to just everyone to stick to their niche and to do that well, and that's how we kind of pitch ourselves.
There is a great film out called Zulu. Have you seen it?
No.
You should see it.
The music's
It's
very,
old
the
film.
music is very
It's
good
a
in it.
very
Yeah,
good
we
film.
have a lot of.
Zulu.
It's got Michael Caine in it, right?
We
Is
have
that right?
Welsh male voice choir on the roster as well.
Yeah.
So I think, in terms of your point of like how to make money, we could. There are probably easier ways to do it than the mission that we've been discussing here in terms of helping people appreciate the value that music can bring to it. But I think what I'm interested in, what we've touched on lots of different ways, is how that can actually enhance the value of something to the point where it becomes more attractive to the audience, the buying audience, or the audience that can be otherwise monetized through sponsorship or whatever. That's not necessarily an easy thing to do, to explain that value proposition when you're dealing with something as intangible as music. But it's something that we'll continue to explore, I'm sure. And yes, sorry.
You're talking about the Zulu principle. Do you think you have access to enough of the right skills and creativity to offer a wide range of
Yeah,
service really.
yeah. I mean, we've started off. You know, we've only put up, I think, last count, either 10 or 12 people on the roster. But we've all come from a background where, you know, we've either worked with or we know a lot of kind of individuals and you know, bands who do things that we like, and you know, the way we work it is we create a pool of, you know, people that we want to put forward as potential artists for the roster, and then we sit down and have a listening session. We work out if they're right for what we're doing. We work out if, you know, you don't want to have, for instance, 8 techno artists on the roster. You can have a handful and that's enough. So we're kind of building it up as we go, but it's all really from kind of personal experience. And you might just walk into a bar and hear a band playing, you know. I quite often go to the open mic nights at the Box in Sauchiehall Street just to hear if there's any kind of unusual talent, and every time I hear someone I just speak to them and give them a card, because that's what it's all about. It's connecting with people that do one thing particularly well, you know. And I think the idea is just to build it up as we go, but keep the quality really high, you know. We don't really want the kind of generic composers, do we? We're trying to kind of keep it, you know,
as a point of difference.
Yeah, you know, because there aren't any companies in the UK that are doing what we're doing. They're all kind of, you know, a couple of guys in a room, you know, 8 people round a table, you know, turning their hand to whatever job comes in the door. And I think it's the same thing. It's a misunderstanding that if you go to the right people, you can get an authentic piece of music. It's not going to cost them any more money than what they're paying elsewhere, you know. So
it's about focus, isn't it? And picking one thing and going for it.
Yeah.
So you want to be the one-stop specialists in the area, so that anyone out there has got a need for music artists, then they would consult with yourself.
Yeah.
And
so
that
you
one-stop.
tell everybody out there that you exist.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that one-stop element to it is also important to make it as easy as possible for people to do, so that all of that back-end licensing stuff can get dealt with.
Well, I know there's other industries out there, creative industries, that Scottish Enterprise are involved with, where they are one-stop shops, communication point for anyone who wants to know about that industry, whether it's new technology or enabling industries, and the creative is no different.
That folds back into the whole thing about, you know, I do think that there's this mass confusion that a lot of producers are just thinking, oh, I need a bit of music, but I don't know how to go about getting it, and you know, and making it as streamlined and simple as possible is really the ultimate. Make them aware that we're there, but then make it, you know, so that you kind of take all the burden of the worry, the licensing, the copyright, dealing with the artist, whatever, that all gets taken away from them. And it's trying to achieve that. That's the kind of main thing, you know.
Your e-commerce will play a big part in that now.
Yeah.
The web and your social media.
Yeah.
That's very big in businesses in general.
Yeah.
Anything else? Otherwise, I think we need to wrap up quite soon. So I'll just. Anything else from the panel, actually? Any burning points to make? I think we could discuss this notion of value in music all night, and I think we probably will. So, but we won't do it here. So, thank you very much, everybody, for coming along and for listening and for participating. And you can keep talking to us as we mill about afterwards. But yeah, thanks a lot.
Dougal?